this group of mismatched people. There's the goths, there's the punks, there's the, all the different people all brought together, united over this one kind of idea of unification through music. And yeah, I get it every night. I didn't realize until lockdown how important performing was for my mental health. Like, I get so much catharsis just out of sheer like testosterone fueled rage of being able to shake my guitar about and throw something around for an hour and a half.
I guess I want to start with a new album, which it sounds fantastic. It sounds like a distillation of everything that's really great about the band, sound-wise, song-wise, and the choice of Nick Launay to produce it, I thought was perfect. I think the sound he's got, it's concise, powerful, explosive. So I guess when every band gets to its third album, you've really got to think about what you're doing, not to just keep repeating yourself. So was that part of the thought process when you came to this record?
It was literally just after we'd finished recording Joy and it had been mixed and mastered and stuff like that. Listening back to it, it had everything that we wanted to from a songwriting perspective. The guitars kind of sounded like what we were aiming for. Nothing was off, but yet it still wasn't quite hitting these kind of sonic markers that we wanted to. We just talked about that at length, about what it was like. So we listened to the music that we did think was, so things like Kanye West, bands like Sun. I listened to a lot of like stoner rock bands, so bands like Sleep and stuff like that. And we're just like, why don't we sound as like big as this band? And a lot of it came down to kind of minimalism. There's too much going on. There's too much absorbing all the frequencies all over. There's too much busyness and too much stuff detracting from each other. So we decided that we were going to like sum everything down so that it could be bigger than everything else, because there was nothing else for it to compete with. So we wrote everything like around a single part. We kept the drums simple, like John the whole way through. Like John's like a really great drummer. Like, he always wants to show that, but we had to like, rein him in and get him to like do that only at certain points, so the drums can be as heavy hitting as possible, because there's not lots of toms being hit and little things that, we've got to duck that out of the way so we don't miss this bit.
Lyric wise with the record, it's I mean from the start the band's always been about something. The songs have got they've got a text to them, there's a variation subjects, but this one seems very concise. It's like it's determined to make a message, almost like not quite a State of the Nation address, but it's definitely reflecting. I guess a lot of it's written in the Brexit sort of period as well, so you feel a lot about there, and the claustrophobia of these times and divisiveness of these times is reflected quite a lot in the songs.
We always like work around like briefs and kind of like an overarching kind of concept, and that kind of idea of stripping everything down so that it was like as big a thing as possible from the most singular thing as possible, then that kind of lends itself into the kind of the lyrical writing, was that like say as much as possible with as few words as possible. Like, one of the problems that's going on like in the world around us politically, in identity politics, in like social media, is there is too much noise. There's too many guitars and drums and bass, like all fighting for different things. They're all trying to play the same song, but they're not. It's not coming through because there's too little differences and stuff like that. So what we wanted to do was, again, like treat it like that, like single it down, just say the most blunt force thing, say the truest thing. Let's deal with nuance later. Let's get to the point. Let's say the most important things that need to be said. And so that kind of was the driving force for the lyrics being these kind of very unsubtle, very straightforward, lacking nuance. And that's going to rile people up the wrong way, especially people that you would have thought would agree with it, because it's like, everyone needs to stick their little bit of nuance in, or their caveats, or their tag something along with it. And you're like, no, let's just keep it pure, say this single thing.
For such a long time, people kept saying, oh, I wish there was a band that came along that made that kind of music, said those kind of things, did it really well, and was mainstream. Not just, it's fantastic. It's a whole great underground scene, of course, but it's always great when somebody gets over the parapets and puts it right into the mainstream. everyone was waiting for it, and then as soon as it happens, those same people start complaining. I mean, do you feel that kind of pressure? Or
it's not kind of pressure. Like, I mean, it's mostly expected, and I guess it almost kind of shows that we're doing what we're intending to. Maybe not that we're doing something right, but we're doing what we're intending to. Like, coming out and saying things that make people uncomfortable should make everyone uncomfortable. It shouldn't just make, like, the Boris Johnsons and the right-wing people whose politics clearly we disagree with. Like, it's not about just making those people comfortable, but also making people who we share politics that haven't been out there shouting about it and haven't been out there. Like, you're going to be uncomfortable if someone's all of a sudden going, I'm fucking pissed off about this, because you've not been doing anything about it. And that's the problem that people have. We make a point of not really engaging in social media from a like outspoken way. Like, we use it just to share information about our albums and share interviews and reviews and whatever, and promote other bands and stuff like that. But we choose to do the talking through our songs, and then through interviews like this, where you can have a bit of nuance. I can explain myself, you can respond, and things like that. And there was an Enemy article where they criticized us quite rightly for not having enough diversity in our support acts, and it always just feels like people want you to. So because we talk about inclusiveness and feminism and race politics and things like that, that we then have to be this kind of like the bastion of that, the most like the zenith of each of those arches, and we're striving to be. We are a work in progress, but the problem is that with social media and with everything moves so quickly that you can't even really latch onto it or kind of stop it. And also, we didn't want to change how we engage with social media, so we didn't really want to say anything until we had like a proper statement or we're doing something with our music. It's not what we're about. We're about a slow, considered process with this that feeds out into this instantaneous, spontaneous thing. But it's not reactionary. It's 100% considered. The original criticism of the band is completely valid and completely welcome, and is something that we should have been looking at before we were.
Do you apply a lot of the critique to yourself anyway? And imagine, I mean, this is not to make you seem like a band that's like a set of monks in a monastery, because I'm sure it's great fun being in IDLES, but with these kind of situations, with that situation the other day or other situation occurred in the past, do you all get together and you apply that critique to yourself, thinking, they're right, we should do a bit more of this? I feel
we're very much in it. Like, we're a work in progress in those things. Like, talking about, say, like Samaritan's talking about toxic masculinity, like Joe, me, Lee, Dev, John, each of us have all like very kind of strong identification with masculinity, both positive and toxic aspects of that. Like, there's often very kind of toxic masculine tropes that weed their way up to the surface within the band, and that's why we sing about it. I mean, that's kind of why it's more important to us to sing about it, and why we've written songs about it, because it's like, we recognize that within us, and we recognize the problems and the flaws and how we should progress as people. But it doesn't mean that we're like all of a sudden cured of all our toxic masculine traits. It happens, but at least we're checking that and thinking about it and trying to progress with it. And I think that's one of the issues with all of it, is that I guess maybe people don't recognize that. I'm saying this like we're getting criticism left, right, and center, and we're not. Like, I think a lot of people do recognize that. Some people don't.
I think. Do you think people just misinterpret it in a way? They sense that you're presenting a manifesto when you're actually presenting question marks.
Yeah, that can happen sometimes, and I think maybe it's because of our kind of enthusiasm and kind of fervent attitude, and the violence of our music and the violence of like Joe's rhetoric. I guess that kind of, it makes it look like we're preaching, but actually it is. Yeah, you're right. It's like, it's more we're asking the questions and talking about the conversation. This is a conversation that people should be having. Like us as men, we want to have a conversation about masculinity and how the patriarchy is bad for us. What else is the patriarchy bad for? Feminism, blah, 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 and so on. And so it's about asking those questions and trying to work out resolve within us, resolve on a personal level. I'm not going to tell a sea of people how they resolve those issues. Like, that's not my place at all. I'm resolving it for myself, and we're putting out there that motions of how we're resolving it for ourselves, so that people can see that it can be resolved, can be a work in progress, and it's okay to recognize that.
Do you think the role of rock music's changed in the last 20, 30 years? I mean, I was just thinking about when I was writing about the record the other day. I mean, when I grew up in the punk days, the Clash were under similar pressures, but from different angles. And I also, as a little caveat to this, I really love the way that you are not a punk band, you are something completely different. And I could see that as somebody grew both periods, been around in both periods, whatever. And but do you think the role of a band has changed now? You know, you have to have all these conversations.
I think it's more just society has changed. Like, I think that, like, you know, again, like us talking about the conversations that we talk about, like that's the progression, you know, because of movements like punk has led to more mainstream conversations about feminism, about equality, about class. And then now we've got like kind of 2020 or whatever we're in now, and like it's about identity politics and the progression of these similar topics, but it's all, you know, vaguely about humanity. I think that like rock music has changed because we have to, you know, in many ways we have to recognize that it's not this cutting edge thing. Like it always interests me to think of like punk, whenever it came along, how it was what I don't understand it is for Gen Z or whatever, but like there's a cultural movement, like it's kind of like the internet or something like that. Like there's a cultural movement where young people are getting it first, they're understanding it first, they're understanding a new way of a perspective of the world, throwing out the kind of the hegemony and what is expected of them, and going, this is what I've learned from watching you guys, this is how it's going to be now. And I think that like I think that rock music doesn't, I can't see rock music ever having that again. I can't see like guitar music being that thing, because I think it's moved on to different art forms. I think maybe even music isn't where it is at the minute. Like I think it's more in kind of visual arts and, you know, video and things like that. I don't know, I'm too old. I'm like beyond the age where I'm going to understand what people are doing. But so I think that rock music is more for that escapism thing. It's more for that for escapism or familiarity, talking about what is real and what is the world around you, or talking about something that has no bearing on reality.
Almost like the soundtrack to the debate and not the debate itself.
Yes, yeah.
It's interesting really with the position you're in, because you're in a band that probably, unless Taylor Swift released another record, you'll probably have a number one album, this album, and yet it feels like a cult record. It's really odd. A number one album in the 70s would have been something that stopped every playground in Britain, whereas now it's still a great achievement, but it doesn't feel like it's right in the middle of culture like it used to.
No, it's well, I think that's just because the way people consume music is so passive now. Like you know, people would previously, you know, even to the 90s and early 2000s, music, someone listening to music, it was a very active thing. It required a ritual, it required a process in order for it to get in your head. The fact that you have to go out and buy the record, the fact that you have to research the band, the fact that you have to put the CD or the vinyl on the vinyl player and turn everything on and make everything the right level, that feeds into its importance because you put something into it. Where now music is so passive. Like if you look at like the charts on Spotify and things like that, and the people that are making all the money, it's almost entirely from passive listening. The people that are listening to it aren't hearing it, and they subscribe no importance to it. So it has diminished the value of stuff. But I think because of that, then things that are getting to number one and stuff like that, like people have more ownership over it because it is required an active, like us getting wherever we're going to get in the charts. It means less now than it would have in the 70s anyway. But like I know that like maybe 90% of people that have bought that record are claiming some form of ownership over it. So that still means that it's still special and still important.
It must be quite frustrating. You know, you've got the band in 10 years, you built up to this point, and then the pandemic came. And I know obviously it's far more frustrating for people who've got normal jobs, can't do it, and people aren't earning any money. But, you know, it is frustrating for the position you're in as well, even though it's compared to a lot of people in a luxury position. But you built the juggernaut up and you've had to put the brakes on. I mean, apart from the performance thing, what's it like for the communication thing?
We're in such a privileged position. Even with the year, like if this had happened to us last year, it would have been a completely different story. Last year was our year. Like we had, you know, the Glastonbury performance, Ali Pali, things like that. Like that was our year to go from one level of a band up to this kind of next thing. And maybe this year would have been something else, but I feel really, really like sorry for those bands that are going to miss out on so many opportunities. Even bands that like we're just going to play their first festival this year. Like that's a life altering experience. So I think what we did from our perspective, we looked at what lockdown was. We were like, well, what do we still have control over? We can release music. That's why we're still releasing our album. We can write and record. We tried doing that over Zoom. It doesn't work. So now that we're able to meet up with each other for however much longer that is. But so we're writing, we're recording. And then I guess in a way, like it's just been interesting releasing an album and not touring. Like it's a whole new perspective on it. It's given opportunity for kind of increased insight, because a lot of our interviews like this one, it has more of an opportunity to grow. Like whenever you're touring and you're doing all these interviews, you've got your safe things you go to. You know, if you can't be arsed talking, you can just, you know, ream stuff off. And it breaks up your day and you don't notice it happening. Whereas I think with this, like the main aspect of this album release has been these interviews, and it's allowed a lot more insight and a lot more kind of self-reflection and introspection on an album that had almost none of that going into it. You know, it was written 2 weeks before we went into the studio. A lot of the vocals were written in the booth. You know, it required a lot of consideration before that point. It took a long time to get to that. But it's interesting that it's almost like reverse the last album, where everything was labored over before we got to the album, and then it kind of just went into the ether and we were blah 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 and playing and not thinking about it ever. It never caught up. So it's weird how it's the exact opposite.
So how's it affecting the fourth album, because you're working on that now? Is all the self-reflection thinking fed back into that, or is it still the same? You just, because you know you could do it off the cuff, you're continuing in that vein?
Yeah, it's we knew what we were going to do. Again, it's weird. Like I think because our background isn't necessarily in music and recording and stuff like that, we're learning like exponentially as things go along. And the last album, working with Nick and Adam especially, I did a lot of the kind of co-production on the album, working with them and I've learned a lot, and that's kind of fed the cogs in what we're going to write on the next album and how the performances are going to be. And I guess a lot of the self-reflection and of these interviews is feeding into the themes and the topics that's good that the album is gonna form, but it's still it's weird. It's like it's not right yet. We always have this like weird limbo period in between albums where we've got a real hunger to write, but none of it. We're just like we spent like 4 hours the other day writing the song, and just we're like, no, we're just gonna scrap it. And but we know exactly what it is. It's in there. It's just gonna come out. So, but I'm excited about it. I think it's another progression from Joy, Ultra Mono, and then this next thing.
Often IDLES, people call you a young band, and of course in career terms you're a young band because you've been around a bit of time. It's only the last few years been successful, but you're not a young band. You're an older band. But did you get a lot of optimism looking at that, what I like to call the generation greeter, the younger generation? You know, the people probably quarter of my age, probably about half your age.
Yeah, so it's like I love it. Like they're so I guess that's the thing, is like a lot of the stuff that we deal with as topics are because there are struggles, but they've kind of worked it out. Like it was like I was saying earlier with like whatever their version of punk is going to be, is really exciting. Like they're so in touch with their emotions and feelings and vulnerabilities and identity, like and how important things should be for identity and how unimportant certain aspects of yourself shouldn't be aligned with your sense of identity. I think it's really exciting, and it's really I really enjoy seeing progress. I've got a 1-year-old daughter. I'm very excited for what the future means for her from a philosophical standpoint. I'm less excited about the shit show that like we're going to leave her with the environment and politics as they are at the minute, but and economics. But I'm excited about what her perspective of the world is going to be, and her perspective on emotions, and how I'm going to seem like my dad seems to me to her, which is pretty great, because she's definitely going to win all these struggles, I hope.